Hey everybody, welcome back for another episode of the Simpleton Sermon Podcast. I have a few quick announcements before we dive into the sermon. First, I wanted to mention that we are scaling back the audio podcast just a little bit. We are still going to post it every week, but it's going to be, the archive is going away. We're not going to have all the episodes, so it's going to be up for about 2 or 3 months. We'll have that many episodes, like 10 or 12 episodes up at a time, but then they will disappear as they get older. The YouTube channel, the Simpleton Sermon Podcast YouTube channel, will still have the archive. You can always go back and watch the videos, but the audio format is going to have sort of a time limit. It will be around, and you're always welcome to come in and tune in, but those will disappear as time goes on. We're not going to keep the audio archive. Also, this will probably be the last episode with an introduction. We're not going to have these little intros. We're just going to jump right into the sermon. I think people know what they're here for. It's pretty clear in the description, and so it's just a lot of me talking, and I don't think we need more of that. So we're going to dive right back in. Let's see. Today we are diving back into the book of Acts, and we're up to chapter 23, and so I'm really excited about that. So grab your Bible, and this is the last time I'm going to say this. Here we go. Margaret Storm Jameson, she's an English author. She once said, "The only way to live is to accept each minute as an unrepeatable miracle. Work at your work, play at your play, shed your tears, enjoy your laughter. Now is the time of your life." And she was talking about how so many of us spend so much time living in the past, feeling regret for lost joys or for shame for things badly done. Even when our minds do, in fact, turn to the future, we spend an inordinate amount of time longing for it or dreading it. But the only way to live is to accept each minute as an unrepeatable miracle. Work at your work, play at your play, shed your tears, enjoy your laughter, because now is the time of your life. I think I've told this story before, but hang in there with me. In my life, ever since I was really young, I always wanted to be a missionary. I was going to travel the world and tell people about Jesus. That was my plan. And for a long time, I thought I would be a medical missionary. I chose my undergrad university. I went to Calvin College because their med program was the best one in the state. I wanted to heal bodies and souls together. And through the twists and turns of life, I switched my major to religion, and I got on a different track towards ministry, but missionary work was always in the back of my mind. Now, as many of you know, before we had all our babies, my wife had a career in teaching English to speakers of other languages. And she worked with refugees and resettlement programs, immigrants in community centers, and international students in the universities, and even good old ESL-type teaching. We were a dynamic duo of international religious leadership. And so when we got to the end of grad school and the graduation was drawing closer, we took a good, hard look at missions. We applied to a number of organizations. I called up the district superintendent in Michigan and I said, "Do not place me in a church. I do not want to be placed in a church. I'm going overseas." I resigned as a full-time youth leader at a lovely church in Chicago that I had been working at for a couple of years. They gave me a cake, and we had the farewell party. And Sarah and I, we had 4 or 5 organizations that we were looking at, and my favorite one was a church in Turkey. There was an international church in Turkey. They needed an English-speaking pastor, and they were hiring a person who taught English to the community. Those were the 2 job openings they needed. And I looked at me, and I looked at Sarah, and I said, "It's perfect." I felt like I got a sneak peek at God's plan, the way it all lined up. And so after I told the district superintendent in Michigan, "Do not give me a church, do not send me anywhere," and after I told my church in Chicago goodbye, and I told the youth group kids goodbye, and I had my party and I ate my cake, I didn't get the job at the church in Turkey. It was too big a risk to take on a young pastor with no experience in senior pastoring. Okay, I understand. So then we turned to this missionary organization that it was home based in Colorado. And they train you in Colorado, and then they send you from there all over the world. And I was really excited to work with this organization. And then we found out the finances of it. It's a self-funding missionary program, and you're disqualified if you have any debt. Now, my wife and I had just completed grad school. We had a little bit of debt. So we were disqualified from that program. So then we turned to this missions opportunity in Vietnam. We were really excited. We were going to look at this one in Vietnam. It actually turned out to be a scam. Wasn't a real organization. And praise God, we found out about that before we gave them any information or money or anything, but it was horrible. Now, long story short, I graduated with a Master's of Divinity, and the first thing I did with that very expensive higher education degree was stick it in a drawer and put on an apron and go bag groceries at Whole Foods, because I had bills to pay. It felt like doors were slamming shut all around us. I called the district superintendent, "Do you have any churches left?" "Nope, it's too late. We've already finished the appointment season for this year." And the church that I had left, I knew that they had filled the youth ministry position because I had trained her. And so there we were, 2 graduate degrees and 0 careers, treading water in jobs we did not want. And it was so frustrating because it felt like God was delaying the starting gun. You know what I mean? I just got done with school and we're ready to go. And finally, I kept thinking to myself, come on, God, I want to go. I want to finally get to doing all that stuff that you have taught me to do. I want to love my neighbor. I want to tell people about Jesus. I want to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, share God's love. I want to make the world a better place. Finally, why are you keeping me from doing that? Because my perfect, super awesome plan fell through, and I'm stuck in this crappy situation, unable to get started. Today, we're in week 3 of our series in the book of Acts, and we've been reading chapter by chapter, and we're all the way up to chapter 23 of Acts. Now, if you remember, we've been following Paul around the ancient world, and he finally gets to Jerusalem, and he gets arrested after like 10 minutes in Jerusalem. And then last week we heard Paul's testimony brought to us by Trammell, and he stands in front of this crowd and he tells them how Jesus changed his life. And then we see that his citizenship comes in handy. He's a Roman citizen, and so there are rules about how he is treated. Chapter 22 finishes up with Paul standing in front of the Jewish council and the chief priests. And what we're going to see in chapter 23, and this is an important thing, no matter how bad things go, no matter where Paul ends up, his mission field was right in front of him all along. Like Margaret Jameson says, now is the time of your life. It says in chapter 23, verse 1, "Now looking intently at the council, Paul said, 'Brothers, I have lived my life with an entirely good conscience before God up to this day.' But the high priest Ananias commanded those standing beside him to strike him on the mouth. And then Paul said to him, 'God is going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. Do you sit to try me according to the law, and in violation of the law order me to be struck?' And so the chapter kind of starts out with like an action scene. Paul looks around and he says, 'Come on, guys, I'm innocent.' And the high priest says, 'Hey, punch him in the face.' So they do. They punch Paul right in the face. And he gets all mad about it. And he says, 'You whitewashed walls.'" Now, I don't know about you guys, but that doesn't mean anything to me, right? Like whitewashed walls, what's the big deal? So I had to look it up to figure out what it meant. And apparently, whitewashed wall is the way they used to describe a dirty wall that has been covered up so that it appears clean, but is not actually clean. It's kind of Greek slang for you hypocrite, you fake person, you phony. Paul's mad because he got punched in the face, which I think that's fair. I think it's fair to get mad if you get punched in the face. And so he's calling them hypocrites because they are supposed to be giving him a trial, and hitting him is in violation of the law. It's kind of like if the cops were to catch a bank robber and then steal his wallet, right? Like they're supposed to be upholding the law, but they're actually breaking the law. And so things are going really well for Paul in front of this council. They're really getting along great. And in verse 6, But Paul, perceiving that one group were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, began crying out in the council, "Brothers, I am a Pharisee, a son of a Pharisee, and I am on trial for the hope and resurrection of the dead." Now again, this verse really doesn't make any sense unless you have a little context. Paul's in trouble. They're punching him in the face. It's obvious they are not in the Paul the Apostle fan club, right? And he looks at the room and he realizes, we got some Pharisees over here and we got some Sadducees over here. Now they're both part of the same Jewish council, but they have disagreements in their theology. And Sadducees don't believe in resurrection. They don't believe in angels or spirits, but Pharisees do. All part of the Jewish council, but they have different views. And so Paul, crafty, clever Paul, uses their division to his advantage. Because Paul is a Pharisee, so he stands up and he shouts, "I'm on trial for the hope and resurrection of the dead." And by saying that, every Pharisee in the room is now on his side, right? Do you see it? He got everybody up on his side. And so this causes a massive uproar, and the council that was a united front against Paul is now divided and against each other. It's kind of like he picked the controversy and then he just kind of lobbed a grenade into the middle of the discussion. It wasn't even difficult. He lobs a discussion grenade and watches the room explode. Now, I know that this text was written 2,000 years ago, and I know a lot of people think that the Bible is outdated, it's not relevant to our modern context, but I want you to try and imagine a church that is divided over a theological issue. So divided that if you just lob a debate grenade into the room, the church would explode and turn on one another and start fighting. Instead of making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world, they would waste all their time bickering with one another with horrible smear campaigns. In case I'm not being blunt enough as I slap you in the face with this obvious parallel, imagine the church is working on a big project. I don't know, trying to recover from a pandemic or a major building project, rebuilding Sunday school, Christian education programs, trying to fundraise. And someone walks in the room and yells, "Love is love, all means all." Or someone else runs in the room and says, "Marriage is one husband, one wife for life." Now, of course, the conversation on human sexuality is important, vital even. But if we let it divide us, if we let it pit each other against one another, take our eyes off of Jesus, we lose the plot. We forget why we are here and we abandon our purpose in this place. Division in the church makes the church easy to manipulate. Paul is working his magic on the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Disagreement, conversation, dialogue is good. It's healthy, even beautiful. But if you let that division, if we turn it into division that distracts you from your purpose in this place, we've lost the plot. I had a fellow pastor phrase it like this. He said, "Look, we're going to talk about this stuff, but we're not going to lose friends over it." To use the old mantra that we've used in this church for years, eyes up, Flushing. All right, so go back to Paul, right? Paul is playing the room like a fiddle. He pits them against one another, and the whole room is in a massive uproar. And in verse 10, it says, "And then the great dissension occurred, and the commander was afraid that Paul would be torn to pieces by them. And he ordered the troops to go down and take him away from them by force and bring him back into the barracks. But on the following night, the Lord stood near him and said, 'Be courageous, for as you have testified to the truth about me in Jerusalem, so you must testify in Rome also.'" Paul goes back to jail where he is safe, and God sends him some words of comfort. And then we add a little murder and intrigue to the plot. Verse 12, it says, "But when it was day, the Jews formed a conspiracy, and they put themselves under an oath, saying that they would neither eat nor drink until they had killed Paul. There was more than 40 who formed this plot. And they came to the chief priests and the elders and said, 'We have put ourselves under an oath to taste nothing until we have killed Paul. Now, therefore, now you and the council notify the commander to bring him down to you as though you were going to investigate his case more thoroughly. And as for us, we are ready to kill him before he comes near this place.' But the son of Paul's sister heard about their ambush, and he came and entered the barracks and told Paul." So there's this big group of guys, like 40 guys, get together and they make this pact. They're like, all right, we are going to kill Paul, and we're not going to eat anything until he is dead. Which really feels like something you should not be telling the chief priests and religious leaders. All right, if you have a pact to go kill someone, don't tell me about it, because I'm not going to be okay with it. Right? But they come to the chief priests, and what we see is actually they're trying to recruit the chief priests to help them. They say, hey, call him down like you've got to ask him some more questions, and we'll get him when he's on his way. Because we all know from all those action movies, the best way to get at an inmate is during a prison transfer, right? And so they're coming after him, but their plot is overheard by Paul's nephew. And so he tells Paul tells the guard tells the commander, and then the commander decides, you know what, this is entirely too much work for me. So I'm just going to pass Paul on up to the next level. Right, I'm going to send him on up the chain of command. Verse 23, it says, "And he called to him 2 of the centurions, and he said, 'Get 200 soldiers ready by the 3rd hour of the night to proceed to Caesarea with 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen.' And they were also to provide mounts to put Paul on and to bring him safely to Felix the governor." So Commander Claudius gathers up a bunch of soldiers, and he gives Paul an armed escort onto Governor Felix. And he writes a letter that they send with to Governor Felix, and he sends Paul on his way. Now, the letter's pretty simple. They actually include it in the text. It just says basically, these Jewish leaders are trying to kill this guy. Doesn't look like he's broke any of our laws. It seems like he may have broken some of the Jewish laws. I found out about this plot to have him murdered, so I'm sending him on to you. That's the whole letter, right? Verse 33, to finish the chapter, it says, "When the horsemen had come to Caesarea, they delivered the letter to the governor. They also presented Paul to him. And when he had read it, he asked what province Paul was from. And then he learned that he was from Cilicia. And he said, 'I will give you a hearing when your accusers arrive as well.' And he gave orders for Paul to be kept in Herod's praetorium." So Paul arrives safe and sound in Caesarea. So to recap, Paul comes to Jerusalem, gets attacked. He's given a chance to give his testimony before Commander Claudius and all the people there. He tells them about Jesus and what Jesus has done in his life. And then there's a plot to kill him that actually ends up getting him sent to the governor, the next level up. And the last thing I want to mention is that it says that Paul was ordered to be kept in Herod's praetorium. Now, I didn't know what a praetorium was, but I assumed, I was reading that, and I was like, it must be like his jailhouse, right? Or like his place where they keep prisoners. But I looked it up, and it's not. A praetorium is Herod's house. It's the governor's mansion. High up Roman officials or governors or kings or whatever, they would have residencies in multiple locations, right? They would have like an apartment in Rome and a place in Caesarea and a ranch out in Jerusalem. And so Paul, at the end of this chapter, is under house arrest in the governor's mansion. It's not too shabby, to be honest. And we'll see what happens with Governor Felix next week. The good news that we have from the text this morning is that God has put you where you need to be. Through all the bumps and bruises, hills and valleys of your life, wherever you are is where you are needed in this moment. The mission field is not some far off country. It's right here in your own backyard. You know, I used to talk about mission work so much. I love missionary work and I love supporting missionaries. And people came to me and they asked, how can you be content to stay here in the United States? I thought you were going to travel. I thought you were going to go all over the world. How can you be content in the local church? And the answer is really simple. I found out there's a whole bunch of people who need to know about Jesus right here in my backyard. Right? Growing up, I had this like romanticized picture where all my neighbors are Christians. Right? I mean, everybody in Michigan, we're all Christians, right? You want to go talk to non-Christians, you got to go all the way across the world. You got to go all the way, halfway around the world to some little village where they don't have electricity and they've never heard of Jesus. That's the only place where people don't know Jesus. I was going to be like Paul. I'd go to some place that was 1,000 years ago, walking from town to town, introducing people to Jesus. But as I grew up, I realized there are people who need Jesus all around me right here. And actually, the more I learned about the world, the more I discovered that assuming that America is the source of Christianity and the rest of the world is wrong, it's actually super arrogant and just straight wrong. The truth is that America is the mission field. Christianity has growing, vibrant churches in other places in the world, like Africa and Asia, and they are sending missionaries here because we are the lost. In America, in Michigan, in Flushing, even among those who grew up in the church, there are so many people who no longer have any connection to Jesus. The mission field, the people we need to reach with Jesus' love, they're right here. God has put you where you need to be. The mission field is all around us. And it doesn't mean you have to stay here, right? It doesn't mean you can't go places and do wonderful work for God's kingdom wherever you are, but that's the point. The mission field is wherever you go, everywhere you go. I think we romanticize sharing the gospel with people. And we think about it like, we have this picture where I'm going to swoop into someone's life when they're feeling down and I'm going to give them Jesus and then we'll lift them up. But the real picture of evangelism, the real picture of discipleship is a lot more like walking with people you already know, sharing your story and listening to theirs, showing them how Jesus could transform their life with God's gift of grace and forgiveness. How we should live our lives according to his teachings and then working together to do that. Just like Paul, telling his story wherever he happened to be prisoner at that moment, God has put us where we need to be to share God's love right now. So now here's some good news that's going to sound a little bit like bad news. When we realize that God has put us where we need to be, in this season, the people we need to reach with the gospel of Jesus Christ, they're all around us. We can get to work right now in this season. When we realize that, we have to let go of this romanticized version where we swoop in and save people who are far away, a world away from Jesus. It's not going to be like it is in the movies. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. You know the movies where there's like a dirty homeless man holding a cardboard sign and the person walks up and hands them a New Testament and says a prayer with them and then the next day they shaved and they're like a CEO of a Fortune 500 company? That's not how it works, right? That's Disney. That's fairy tales. This is not fairy tales. This is real life. And real life is messy and even painful, walking with someone on their journey and gently but humbly guiding them closer to Jesus. I want you to think about what Paul actually accomplished here. Like last week, he gave his testimony. He got in front of everybody and he told in front of the commander and all the people who would listen, he told his story, right? And told them about Jesus and the new life that Jesus gives to people. And then they punched him in the face. Literally, right? They punched him in the face. And verse 11, God comes in to give him some encouragement. And what does he say? He says in verse 11, he said, "Be courageous, for as you have testified to the truth about me in Jerusalem, so you must testify in Rome also." Paul tells his story, gets punched in the face, and God says, "Awesome work. Do it again in Rome." God put you where you need to be. But instead of some romanticized story of Disney-style transformation, you might get punched in the face when you're trying to love people in this world. So coming out of the chapter in Paul's story, there are two big challenges for us. Number one, start your ministry right now. Don't wait for everything to be perfect. Tell your story to everyone, everywhere. You can start loving people and sharing God's love with people in your daily life right now. Don't wait for some perfect moment where all the stars align and now I'm ready to start loving people. Start loving people now. There is a coworker or a neighbor or a friend at the senior center or whatever. There is someone in your life who you know already who needs you to pray for them. They need Jesus in their life right now. They need you to invest in them, to tell them about how much Jesus loves them, to invite them to church or introduce them to a community where you can love and encourage and challenge and laugh and weep and support one another. So challenge number 1 is start your ministry right now. Challenge number 2, be courageous. God did not promise that it was going to be easy, and the truth is sometimes we'll get punched in the face. The promise that we do have is that God has put you where you are on purpose. You can do great things to spread the love of God right here. When I graduated from seminary, I was frustrated with God because I felt like he was denying my grand plan. He was delaying me from loving people. God, I want to get to loving people. I want to do that. But the rest of that story is the truth is God ended up putting me to work right where I was. And he did great things through me. I got to be a part of that. There was no need for me to wait for the stars to align. I could start loving people right where I was. Margaret Storm Jameson once said, the only way to live is to accept every minute as an unrepeatable miracle. Work at your work, play at your play, shed your tears and enjoy your laughter, because now is the time of your life. And so I'll leave you with this. May you remember that God has put you where you need to be. Open your eyes to those who need your love, who have been standing in front of you all along. Tell your story of God's work in your life to everyone, everywhere. And may you be courageous. Live boldly with your life. Amen. This has been another episode of the Simpleton Sermon Podcast. For one last time, let me plug the local church. If you are able to connect with a body of believers, brothers and sisters in Christ, please find a local church to worship God and learn how to grow closer to God by loving your neighbor. It's just an incredible opportunity that we have this chance to gather with other believers. These sermons, while I hope they help your spiritual development, they just simply cannot replace your involvement in the local church. Moving forward, we're not going to have these little intros and outros. We're just going to post the clean audio of the sermon. Of course, if you want to catch the video of the sermon, you can head over to the Simpleton Sermon YouTube channel, or if you want the manuscript, you can go to thesimpleton.org, and that's where you can get the manuscript, and it's downloadable for PDF or Word document. So, all right, well, I am looking forward to the future, and I will see you guys next week.